We've got a lot more to pack in, so thanks for your attention. We've got very excited to present Dr. Krista Siefried, who is Clinical Research Lead and a Deputy Director at NCCRED, who is presenting with Julie Matheson, an early career First Nations researcher at the University of Sydney. And they're talking about some work that they're going to undertake as part of a nested study in a randomised controlled trial of lisdexamphetamine versus placebo for the treatment of acute methamphetamine withdrawal. So thank you.
So we will open with an acknowledgement of country, just echoing, oh, it's down here, this is great. So just echoing what others have said today, that we acknowledge that we are on Gadigal and Bidjigal lands of the Eora Nations, and we'd like to recognize the strength and resilience of the people who maintain a continuing connection to the lands and waters in this region, a right and responsibility that was never ceded. And we'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners and caretakers of nations throughout Australia where our research is taking place, and the research that we're presenting today will happen. So the OLAM trial is supported by the National Health and Medical Research Council of Australia, the Department of Health and Aged Care Australia, which is now the Department of Health, Disability and Aging. Sorry, I don't know why that wasn't updated. And the National Centre for Clinical Research on Emerging Drugs. We have no other conflicts to declare. So this is really Julie's presentation. I'm just here to background the OLAM RCT. So the OLAM RCT came from, I'm not going to go through the epidemiological data. I think we're well set here for this presentation. So the OLAM study initially started sort of at the same time as the Lima trial was actually finishing. And so at the time that we were completing Lima, we started talking about how within Lima we'd been able to demonstrate that it was safe to get people up to 250 milligrams of lisdexamphetamine. But what if we actually addressed the early withdrawal symptoms in a way that started in an opposite fashion? So instead of tapering people up, what if we started at a high dose and then tapered down? And just really addressing that initial acute withdrawal phase. And so we piloted that trial again during COVID and heavily COVID affected, but Liam Aitchison, who's somewhere here, managed to submit his PhD with those results. So we were able to then demonstrate safety and feasibility for the use in acute methamphetamine withdrawal, and went on to design a multi-center double-blind RCT, which has started recruiting now across 2 sites, with 2 other sites about to be activated, I think, any moment, and I think lots of you are here today, so thank you. Basically, that study is going to enroll 184 participants who will be randomized 1-to-1 to a tapering lisdexamphetamine versus placebo in an inpatient withdrawal setting. And participants will be blinded to both the taper schedule, so how much they and how quickly they decrease their dose, as well as whether they are on the placebo or the active agent. So there's a whole bunch of things that we're looking at here, but the main primary outcome is between group mean difference in withdrawal severity over that 7-day period. And that will be measured using the AWQ, which is a structured questionnaire measuring the severity of symptoms. And so there are a whole bunch of secondary outcomes, but really what we want to talk about today is a qualitative nested study examining the experience of First Nations people in the trial. So we know that First Nations people are overrepresented, so this was a really important outcome for our trial. And Michael Doyle and Julie, who's here with me today, are really heading up this study across all of the trial sites. And so I will hand over to Julie.
I promise I'll be really quick. All right, so I just want to walk you through the First Nations Nested study. We're really excited to get this started. It's only just launched. We've just interviewed the second participant, so we're very early stage at the moment. So we know that there's a fair few number of specific challenges that First Nations people face when they're seeking methamphetamine treatment. For instance, we know that there's historical dispossession, generational trauma, ongoing socioeconomic disadvantage, all of which contribute to a higher likelihood of using methamphetamine than First Nations people. We know that there's limited treatment services. This may be because there aren't any available within the actual community that they live in, or they might not be fiscally available, they might be too expensive, they might not be culturally appropriate. People who do actually go into methamphetamine treatment might worry or experience racism, discrimination, or stigma, and there is limited data on effective treatment options. So most of what we have is epidemiological in nature. We don't actually have much to actually say this is what is appropriate and helpful for First Nations people. So for the nested study, we have two particular aims that we're looking for. We want to know whether OLAM, the overall study, is actually appropriate for First Nations participants first and foremost, but we also want to understand a little bit more about the needs and experiences of First Nations people who are seeking methamphetamine treatment so that we can contribute to the literature and hopefully produce better programs in future. So we're doing two qualitative interviews. They're both 60 minutes long. People are paid $60 for participating. They are open to anybody who is of First Nations descent. We use a yarning methodology, which is, if you're unfamiliar, that is a more semi-structured. It's casual. It's much more less serious than traditional interviewing techniques. We usually start with like a social yarn, so sitting down, getting to know each other, developing rapport, before we lead on to an actual topic-based interview, which is participant-led. So like, even though I have an interview guide of topics and questions that we're interested in, the participant can actually lead the discussion and tell me anything that is of importance to them. This is a culturally safe, accepted method within First Nations research. And I also want to mention that we do have First Nations ownership of this project. As Krista mentioned, Michael Doyle specifically developed most of the program. We have leadership through the Edith Collins Aboriginal Reference Group, and we've had some consultation with various Aboriginal community-controlled health organisations as well. So as I mentioned, we have two interviews. The first one is targeted for day 7, so while the participant is still within treatment in a hospital setting. The topics for this one are generally more about their expectations for the trial and what they were feeling going in. So it's things like their experiences during OLAM, their expectations beforehand, what made them decide to actually go into treatment in the first place, their experiences in past treatment, whether that was good or bad and why, cultural needs and social supports that they have in place. And then the second interview is actually 2 weeks later, so about 2 weeks after people have left treatment. And they're topics such as whether OLAM met their expectations or their post-treatment experience, whether they had other supports that they went to, what they liked about them, what they didn't like, and what other supports are needed. So the outcomes are very much tied to the aims that I mentioned before. We want an evaluation of whether OLAM is effective and culturally appropriate for First Nations participants. But we also really want that improved understanding of treatment needs for First Nations people so that we can publish some data and hopefully improve things and not just have epidemiological data and something that can actually be helpful. I'd love to thank the OLAM research team, site coordinators, and the Edith Collins Aboriginal Reference Group. And yeah, thank you very much.